Hi, folks. Welcome to a long overdue installment of This Week in Humor. I've had a lot going on with my book, and I'm going to be doing some work on that here shortly. But I wanted to take a moment and respond to a question that I received from a student in a dear colleague of mine's class about an article that I wrote. And it's really interesting because the student's question was just not something I expected. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. So there's this wonderful book here put out by my research colleague, Dr. Stephanie Kelly, here at North Carolina A&T, where I work. And she asked me some years ago to write a chapter on humorous communication in the digital world, in emails, in a video, something like this. How do you use humor in what they call computer-mediated communication? And that's, online instructional communication. And how would you use humor to be a better online instructor? The thing was, as the students noted, I wrote this chapter in 2019. And I wrote it and had it pretty much submitted before the pandemic hit. And the students asked, after having read it, well, what would you have changed about that, what you wrote? How would you change it, given that since when you wrote it and now we've had this pandemic that forced everyone to do a whole lot more online than we had before? And really the question just kind of struck me. I didn't have much to say to them. I just remember Stephanie reaching out to me and saying, wow, what do you think about this? And I said, that's a great question. And it caused me to go back and reread my chapter with that in mind and think hard, not too hard because it's a time crunch. The class is almost over, so I haven't had a lot of time to really craft out a great response, but no worries, it's a question. So I'm going to treat it like I would treat any question that I would have gotten if I were giving the presentation. So let me tell you a little bit about what's in the text, what's in my chapter specifically. I talk about a couple of things in broad ways. One, I note that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that using humor in online communications, in your classroom, whether it be face-to-face or online, is helpful in helping students remain engaged and helping them sometimes to understand the material. And I have spent a lot of time writing and working on topics related to humor as part of teaching, as part of communication. And in general, as you might be well aware from this channel, it's something that I think is important and something we need to work with well. But I go over that, that kind of basic stuff to cover the research. And then I talk about something that's called Poe's Law. And Poe's Law is a law from the early days of the internet, which states that if you're going to be humorous, or if you're going to attempt humor in any sort of online forum, whether it be a chat room or some sort of virtual area or an email or in a Twitter, whatever it happens to be, you need to be exceptionally clear that what you're doing is humor, because there is someone somewhere, lots of someones somewhere, that might take what you think is being funny as being serious. And the context of Poe's Law, just to give you a quick little bit of history, is that this came out from a discussion on creationism in an online chat forum where someone was trying to be satirical and other people took them as being serious. And it really stunned the author because the author thought the satirical nature was clear in and from the words and the writing that they were doing. And this just tells you, as you might have experienced just in your own life, that sometimes we don't know when someone's being humorous. And satire is something especially that we need to worry about and be clear when we don't have our normal cues of I'm being satirical, like being on a comedy show where I'm doing satire. So it's expected and that sort of thing. And then I said, well, if you're going to do that, well, then there are things that you can do to tell people that you're being humorous. Use emojis. And while that may seem obvious, what might not be obvious, and this is not research that I did, but research that's out there, is that emojis work better as disambiguators of meaning in text when they come at the end. So think of it kind of like this. If I were to put a bunch of little smiley face emojis and then tell a joke, you might be confused. But if I told a joke and then gave a bunch of smiley face emojis, you'd be like, oh, I get it now, right? And that seems to go well with what we know about laughter. I don't go, ha, 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 and then tell you something funny. I typically tell you something funny and then laugh as an indicator that I thought or wanted that to be funny. So the kind of meaning disambiguator, the thing that tells you what I'm thinking, comes at the end, not at the beginning. So those were just a couple of things, right? And I said, you've got to make it clear in your writing, and you don't necessarily want to go just for, laughs and jokes and this sort of thing. You want to create an easy online atmosphere. You want to set the stage so that people can understand that you're doing and using humor. So how would I change that? How would I have changed this chapter given everything that we've seen and everything that we've experienced as a variety of cultures across the world given the pandemic? And the truth is, I'd probably change a lot of things, right? But the first thing I would do is I'd really want to do a dig deep and do a lot of research and get a sense of just how different we all behave now online and in computer mediated communications than we did then. And from there, see how in a naturalistic way humor has changed. One thing I would double down on is saying that you've got to be very, very clear in what you're using as a way to tell people that you're being funny. Do not think for a moment that people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Do your best to indicate humor. So how would you do that? These are some of the things I would change. Well, one of the things that I would do is I would say it's probably not going to work at the first go, because if you're just getting introduced to people, if you're just getting to know them, you're probably not going to be able to indicate, like I would here with some sort of visual cue, that I'm trying to be funny. What I would imagine that you're trying to do is, or what you should be doing, is setting the space that not everything that's happening is super serious or super formal. How can you indicate that in what you're doing in the computer? So you can give things to them like, I have my students call me Dr. Mike. That's a way of introducing informality. When I communicate with them, it's not just about what's going on in the class, though that's important. I try and add in little things either on the front end or the back end of the communication that reveal something of myself to them, not just as their teacher, but as someone who has a life outside of the job that they do. So tell them a little bit about my family. So one of the things that I've come to realize over the past couple of years as I've thought more about these things is that when we want to introduce humor and laughter and levity into our spaces, we have to kind of prep the soil, right? We can't just go in there and drop a couple jokes and think that they're going to work. We need to do things to allow for the humor to grow, right? So how can you do that? Well, you can do that by showing a little bit of your personal side. You could just simply show them things that you think are funny. I sometimes show my students the epic rap battles of history video of the great philosophers, East versus West. That's clearly something that they're going to understand because it's epic rap battles. And it's obviously kind of a humorous bit, okay? I also try to introduce little bits of wordplay, very subtle ones, not anything that you're going to pick up on and say, oh, that was a pun or whatnot. It's just something that invites the reader to enjoy what they're reading as more than just the conveyance of information, right? That there's something to what I'm doing with the words that I'm doing just with the words, not necessarily to make you learn it better or whatnot, okay? But the most critical thing that I would suggest to all of you when you're trying to use humor and trying to inculcate humor in what you're doing, especially on computer-mediated communications, is you have to inject you as a person doing that work. If they see your communication as nothing more than the relaying of information that they could get by Googling, they're not going to pay attention to you. They want to know what Dr. Mike says about this thing. They want to know this information is coming from Dr. Mike, to use me as an example. Or better yet, they want to know you. How are you the author of these sorts of things? So one of the things that I would really want to do, because it's so absent in the digital communication, is remind us to inject our persons and personalities into these, right? How do you take the information? How do you come across it? What tickles you when you read or this sort of thing? Start to introduce those things. And it doesn't mean that people are going to necessarily laugh with you or even laugh at you. But if they see you enjoying, right, playing with the material, doing things beyond just relaying information, that's going to open that space up. So that's just kind of what I've been thinking over in the last 24 to 36 hours since the question was raised. It's not a great answer, I'll completely admit it, but it is an answer that I think would help people focus on some things that I think are really important. And those things, to recap, are becoming present as an individual in the communications, trying to reach out as the author to your readers as more than someone who's just relaying information. And overall, when you try and play with something, when you try and inject fun through your own activity into that which you do, it's going to come across. Now, you're not necessarily going to get laughs like you would get laughs at a comedy club, but that's not really the important part. The important part is that freedom, that laughter, those little chuckles, what we do when we lull, that sort of stuff. That's what's important. So I hope I answered your question. I really appreciate that you asked it. It really makes me wish I had a couple more days or hours or weeks to go into this. And maybe if Dr. Kelly, if Stephanie wants to do it, that's something we can approach in the future. As I say to my listeners and my readers and my watchers or any of those folks, you got to, of course, like and subscribe, that sort of thing. But laugh often and much, and we'll see you next time on This Week in Humor. Hopefully without the big break between the last one and this one.